In this video, I'm going to show you 10 incredible tips and tricks on how to get better selections, focusing on cleaning up the edges. There are so many tools and techniques in Photoshop. You have to stick around and watch this. It all begins with how we create our selection. I'm going to tell you all the different ways that I love creating selections. Then we can talk about reducing density of a mask and how that can help us find edges that we're missing and all kinds of different things. Then a very cool tool that you might not expect that could help you clean up edges and corners of your mask. It's incredibly effective, from everything to armpits all the way up to very complex hair. We're going to talk about how to create very complex selections with channels. It's much easier than you think. And then I'm going to teach you some of my favorite little tips and tricks for using the select and mask functionality in Photoshop. It's all right here in this tutorial. It's going to be incredible and fun. You got to stick around and check it out. Got to mention, this video is sponsored by Envato Elements. Download a bajillion different design assets, brushes, all kinds of stuff for one monthly price. Check out the link in the description. You got a free 7-day trial. You're going to love it. Now let's get started with this video. Alrighty, let's get started here in Photoshop. I am so excited for this video. There's so many cool things that we are going to go over. Let's begin here with this photo. The first thing, before you even can refine an edge in Photoshop, you gotta make an actual selection. And there's a bunch of different ways to make selections. Primarily what we're gonna look at are these 4 selection features up here. Select sky, which is like an artificial intelligence thing in Photoshop where it tries to find the sky in this image. It does an okay job of that, right? It kind of got the blaze of the horse as well. Command or Control D to deselect. We also have this select subject, which we're going to do that in just a second. We also have focus area, which helps you select something as long as it's in focus, and it gives you some features. It's actually a very nice underutilized feature in Photoshop, I think. And then there's also color range, which allows you not to select by what's in focus, but to select based upon a particular color. These are all very great features and useful in their own accord. However, for an image like this, if we go focus area, there's too much of this little post thing that the horse is jumping over. It's going to select too much of that. So I will probably just try to rely on Photoshop's AI and say select subject, and you can see it does an okay job. I mean, it kind of makes a mess down here by his paws or his hooves, maybe I should say. But an image like this is always going to be kind of difficult. Let's talk about color range here before we get to focus area. Let's say we're looking at this photo. We want to change the blue glasses to match the middle yellow glasses. A bunch of different ways, of course, we could make the selection. We're going to use the select color range option, but we're going to give Photoshop as much help as we can. So we're going to grab our rectangular marquee tool first and just draw a little selection around those glasses, right? Now, when we go to select color range, Photoshop's going to say, all right, I'm going to focus on colors, but only colors within this little selection you've already made. Cool. Let me zoom in here a little bit. We're going to go select color range. Now, when I do this, you can see that I've already been playing around with this because the glasses are selected. What I can do, and what you are probably seeing, is something more like this, and maybe something that looks more like this, where just sort of nothing is selected. Now, one quick thing, when we select, we can select the color which we want to select. So we're saying, look, color range, we want you to select the sampled colors. You could also just say, hey, select the cyans, and it's going to do an okay job. You can see it's not solid white down there in the preview, which means that it's going to look like we have a selection, but it's only going to be like a half selection. We could try, all right, give me the blues instead. The blue, that's even less that it's selecting. So we probably want to go with sampled colors, but do note, you can select highlights, midtones, shadows, skin tones, all kinds of different things in here. I'm going to focus on sampled colors. Now, you're going to have a little bit of a problem here if you use the eyedropper tool anything like I do, and that is I very rarely keep my sample size at point sample. Normally I'm up here playing in the 11s, the 31, 51 by 51s, depending on what I'm retouching or what I'm working on. For something like a color range, you want to make sure you go back to point sample, so you're just getting the blues of the glasses. If we go like 51 by 51, it's going to start sampling colors from her skin. Not going to be good. So we can select that and then just hold down your shift key and just drag the eyedropper all over the blue glasses, right? Anywhere where you think there might be a new blue color that isn't being selected, and then adjust your fuzziness slider to try to get a selection that looks pretty good. You can change your selection preview down here. I usually like to work with black matte. Something like that is fine. And you can see pulled up right in front of you, there is what we're going to be selecting. That looks pretty good to me. I'm going to go back to none here, and then I'll hit OK, and you can see we've selected the glasses. Then it's as simple as let's just throw a hue saturation adjustment layer on here, and we'll just change this to like pretty close to yellow, crank up that saturation to make it ridiculous, maybe brighten it a little bit, something like that. And just like that, it takes less than a minute if you're not explaining it to somebody. And you can go in and make pretty complex selections when you're talking about targeting a specific color. But there's just those couple things you want to keep in mind. Namely, make sure your eyedropper tool is set to point sample. Very, very important. All right, still here on the first point or the first tip of this video, talking about getting your initial selection. It's so super important. Now here we have this beautiful scarlet macaw, and somebody captured him flying through the air, and he is nicely in focus. The background, however, pretty out of focus. So this tells me, look, you've got 800 different ways to make a selection in Photoshop. You've got object selection, you've got quick selection, you've got the magic wand tool, which we're not going to talk about. Object selection is cool. You've even got this object finder option, which will automatically, if you have it ticked on, automatically go through your image and try to pick out all the objects. You can see Photoshop doing its thing here. Give it a minute, and it says like, hey, you got this bird and you got this background, right? So there's a lot of interesting tools that Photoshop has. Also up here under layer, you have this mask all objects, which Photoshop will try to identify every piece of everything in your image and create a mask for it. We don't want any of that stuff. We think in this case, going select focus area, bringing up the focus area dialog box, that this is going to work particularly well for us. What I am going to do here is hit the letter Z. You can grab your magnifying glass and just zoom in and take a look at the edges. We're getting pretty good edges here. You can see over here, we're cutting off part of his feather. We'll fix that stuff. And his beak, part of his snout up there, and just a couple little things. Some of the edges here maybe need to get corrected. And you can play with the in focus range. You can try to crank it up. You just want to be careful, because if you push it up too much, the whole background will come back in focus and there will be no isolated object. So this is a really, really great way. If you have something that is really tack sharp in focus, you want to pluck it off the background and work with it. Focus area is a fantastic way to not only make that selection quickly, but to get a preview of the selection. You can see here a bunch of different viewing modes. I'm using overlay in this case, but you can look to see here's what it would look like on black. We haven't done anything to the selection yet, and it looks pretty okay. I mean, we can do a lot to make it better, but pretty okay. And the one thing I will say, if we zoom in on this, you can really see how jaggy those edges are, right? It's very Wolfenstein 1997, super jagged. So sometimes, and this all depends on the image, the little softened edge, just to give it a little kiss of feather, that can make a nice difference. And in this case, I think it's going to do us some good. So we're going to hit that soften edge, turn it on. Now, in this case, we can output to whatever we want. I'm going to say, give me a new layer with layer mask, just so I'm working on my own thing. By the way, you have this add to your selection brush tool, so we can say, hey, yeah, give me the rest of the nose or the beak there. I can make this brush a little smaller. I could try to come down here and get it to select the rest of his beak down here, and it picks it up. We come around here. Is that part of his throat there? I don't know. I don't know if it is or not. Maybe. We'll figure that out later. So you can quickly come in and do some stuff like that. We could maybe even come along the edges of the feathers like so, and see if it can automatically pick that stuff up. Make sure it's not getting too much of the background. You're going to see in a little bit, one of the tips coming up I'm going to show you is really going to make cleaning up the edges of these feathers, I mean, a piece of cake. But here we go. Pretty good. We're going to hit OK. We're going to live with that selection. All right, this video is sponsored by my friends at Envato Elements. You absolutely got to check them out if you're a designer, photographer, digital artist, graphic designer, video editor, anything where you want to look more professional, deliver over and above for your clients with ease. Envato Elements helps you do that by providing you with millions of design elements, stock photos, video, audio, templates, PSDs, design template files, brushes, fonts, WordPress, websites, motion graphics, video, all kinds of different stuff. It's all there. It's like having the world's largest design toolbox, blam, added right to your workflow by just signing up. You got a free 7-day trial if you use my link in the description, plus it helps support the channel, so I appreciate that. Just think that ways you could speed up your current design process. Check them out, Envato Elements. Use that link in the description and get your subscription today. Thank you for checking them out, and thank you, Envato Elements, for subscribing. Not for subscribing, but for sponsoring this video. Please do subscribe as well. Now let's get back to the video. And I probably could have and should have mentioned there in that focus area dialog box, there is also the option right there to send, hey, I got my base selection, send me right to select and mask. And then you could make further adjustments there. But let's say we're looking at this and we're looking over our selection. It's kind of chunky a little bit, but you can see there's clearly some stuff that's missing, right? Like right there, we got a piece of his feather that we know is missing. Well, this brings me to tip number 2, and this has to do with when you're working with a mask in Photoshop, you select the mask, bring up your properties panel, and you have 2 options here called density and feather. Feather is just going to blur the edges of your mask. We're not getting into that right here. What I'm concerned with or interested in is density, because if we reduce the density of the mask down to like 2-3%, we can still see our little checkerboard showing up where it's like that's what's transparent, but we can start to see what we're masking out. And we can grab our brush tool, and I am going to just size my brush way down. And by the way, what I'm doing is I'm holding down Control and Option on the Mac. You can just, I believe, hold down the Alt key on the PC, click and drag side to side or up and down, and you can adjust the size and the hardness of your brush very quickly. I am going to set my foreground color to white, and I'm just going to come in here and just paint that little chunk that's missing right back in there. Maybe we got a little bit there that's missing as well. Maybe this little thing hanging off his neck. I don't know if it belongs to the bird or not. I think it just looks cleaner without it, so I'm going to take that off. Maybe I'll clean up this edge down here around his neck bit. And you could go around your mask very quickly with the density reduced and say, yeah, like the whole edge of his wing there, just bring that back. It's a feather. It doesn't have to be perfectly straight or anything crazy. In fact, I'm just using my mouse here and dragging along and bringing some of this stuff back. So you can go over the edges of your mask and quickly bring back stuff that's missing. But the point is you can see that it's missing when you reduce the density of your mask way down. I'm talking 2-3% is where you want to reduce that. So I turn the density back up, and we're back to having our mask just as it was, but we have everything now that we want. We're not cutting away stuff that we really want, is what I'm trying to say. And this brings me quite smoothly to point number 3, and this is like a superpower. Using this tool, which I use for almost nothing in Photoshop, will help clean up all these edges. You see here, we've got these bits of green that are just left behind, and there's really no tool in Photoshop right now, as of this day in 2023, that gets rid of that stuff very well, whether it's select and mask, quick mask, the different selecting features, AI, whatever. It just doesn't do it very well. So if you select the layer mask itself, you can use the smudge tool, and I keep the strength right around 50, and again I'll just reduce the brush size down. Now take note, I have the mask selected, so we are working on the mask. In fact, if I Alt-Option click the mask, you can see I've got these rounded edges here. Well, just remember that, because I'm going to Alt-Option click the mask again to get back to here, and I'm just going to paint, and I'm going to push white in my mask up over the bits that are green, right? And it's just going to wipe them away, right? Because it's just stretching the mask out. If I Alt-Option click on the mask now, you can see we've wiped the white away and we've stretched the black out over it. But what it's done is it's given us a very realistic edge. In fact, if we want to bring back the edge of some of these wings, we can do it just like that. Just stretch them with the smudge tool, right? So we could come over the whole edge and just clean all of it up. In fact, I'm just going to speed up the video here, and I'm going to go through and quickly clean up these edges just to show you how quickly and nicely you can clean up edges of even a really, really complex job like these feathers. And you can just see how something that's very organic, like these feathers that are going every which way and have a very rough random edge, how nice you can make it look very quickly. I could just throw any old color underneath this. Maybe we could go with, just like go with a light blue like that. And you can see we have very cleanly extracted this macaw from what is quite a complex background, but it's very quick, it's very easy, and you get a great result when you combine that focus area with that smudge tool cleaning up the mask. All right, moving on to tip number 4, let's talk about cleaning up haloing edges and getting a good, clean, sharp edge with select and mask. Now, this is particularly useful when you're dealing with an image like this, where you have a lot of very clean, sharp edges, and you don't need to worry about hair, fuzzy stuff, feathers, things like that. Let's grab our selection first. We're going to go with Old Faithful here, select a focus area, although there's, like I've mentioned, a million different ways to grab a quick selection here in Photoshop. So you can see that's pretty nice. It has kept the little blue center in the donut. Don't worry about that. We're going to take this, though, and say, look, give me select and mask. We're going to go right into select and mask, just like that. Now, what I think I want to do is look at this over black, because that's going to tell me, like, oh, yeah, we're missing part of a finger. We're missing stripes of the donut. So I'm going to take the brush tool here, and I'm just going to paint all of that stuff back as quickly as I am able to. All right, that's great. That's not really part of the trick here that I wanted to talk about. So with all of that out of the way, we're just going to ignore the blue in the middle. You know what? Actually, we're not going to ignore the blue in the middle right now. We are going to hold down our Alt-Option key, and we're just going to minus out the blue in the middle. And I'm just going to quickly, with the pen tool, with the brush tool here, go in and just dust some of that away. And again, there's a lot of different ways you can go about cleaning this up as well. Still holding down the Alt-Option key, and I'm just wiggling around in there a little bit. I know that it's not going to be a perfect selection, but I'm not that picky. And then there's a little bit of blue there on the back side of the hand. Again, we're not going to worry about that right here at this point in time. What I'm going to do here is maybe we'll go to overlay. I think we'll stick with on black in terms of our view mode. I am going to really zoom in on the edges, probably of the arm, because we can get, or the hand maybe here, because here we can see both the edge of our donut and the edge of the arm, right? See how jagged, and it looks bad. It looks good, but it looks bad. If you're far away, it looks good. It looked good from a distance, which isn't always a good thing. What we're going to do here is we're going to use these global refinements. We'll begin with smooth and just try to smooth out some of the jagginess. You're going to see it's going to smooth some of that down. That's cool. Maybe I'll smooth it even more. And again, don't just focus on the arm if you're working on this image for a client or something. You want to really go over the whole image and just check all your edges. Make sure you're not damaging anything too much. And then, well, I'm actually going to remain zoomed in here. And then I'm going to feather this. So I'm going to bring the feather out a couple pixels until I start to see a bit of a glow around my donut. So something like that, 4 or 5, where it looks bad. And then we're going to use our contrast slider, increase that, and that's going to sort of suck the glow back in. And this is going to give us a good control over how much of that glow do we want to remain, right? If it's going to be over a very dark background like this, we don't really want any of that glow to be there, right? Because that was a very light blue background. So I'm going to continue smoothing this actually, and maybe I'll feather it a little bit more, and maybe I'll add a little bit more contrast, really try to pull this back in. This is where you could even begin playing with shift edge, but just be careful with shift edge. You can really take things in very, very quickly. And this looks good. Now you're going to notice here stuff like this little corner. This is what I was talking about before with the smudge tool. That's something that even these more advanced techniques with select and mask, you have to go in and get rid of that stuff manually. Now you could use the brush here, but the smudge tool, it just gives a more natural finished product. I don't know how else to put it than that. Whoop, and I keep going back to my overlay view mode because I keep hitting the letter V. So there we go. I think we have a good selection there. And then you would just go and choose, how do I want to output this? Probably new layer with layer mask is just fine. And we would just hit OK. And now, of course, we have our donuts here above a black background, whereas a moment ago, they had this sort of teal blue background. So we just get very nice, clean, sharp edges that look very much like a fast food menu, where maybe you take photos that are shot over light, and then you're just going to completely change the color of the background to black. All right, yes, we've moved along to tip number 5, and this is one of my favorite brush tricks in order to clean up complex and simple edges. And you're going to see we're going to do both of them here with this photo, because we're going to take Mr. Dog and we're going to put him here in this alley. But this is a pretty complex selection. So we have a bunch of different options and ways we can attack this. I'm going to grab the quick selection tool and just choose select subject. Let Photoshop do its thing. By the way, this is the same select subject as select subject right there. And you can see, pretty good. And then we can just hit the select and mask button. You could go select, select and mask. I like the hotkey Command Option R. That would be Control Alt R on the PC. And you can see here he is. The selection no longer looks all that good because the edges are kind of rough. I'm going to here, let's say black, and let's just reduce the opacity of this just so it's darkened, but we can see the hair that we're missing. And by the way, I'm not going to focus on, there is a little bit there in the middle of his little button clasp thing. We're not going to worry about that in this video. What I'm going to do here with Select and Mask is I'm going to use the Refine Edge brush. Now, the Refine Edge brush is a little bit tricky. It's a bit temperamental, but one of the things that I found, as just sort of a sub tip here, one of the things that I found that works best with this brush are A, use it with a soft edge, and B, use it, make it as small as you can get away with, right? You just want it to kind of straddle the edge that you're looking at. You don't want to take a giant brush and stretch it out over the whole thing. It just doesn't seem to work very well. So I'm just going to take this, I'm going to go over the edge of our dog's hoodie here, and I'm going to create my own edge for Photoshop to examine. I don't care about it being 100,000,000% perfect here. I just want it to be good enough for the purposes of this video. So something like that. Let's see how it does. Yeah, all right. It's okay. It's not bad. I can tell we're going to have issues later, but whatever. We're going to live with it. By the way, if I hit this little show edge option, you can see there's exactly the edge that I painted for Photoshop to examine. So show edge can give you an idea of what is going on there. We're not going to worry about global refinement, smooth feather, contrast, and shifting the edge, contracting the edge. There's the word I was looking for. They're not going to work well for super complex, hairy, fuzzy, furry selections like this. We're going to output this to a new layer with layer mask. We're going to hit OK. And now we have this layer, which we can drag into our street scene. So I'm going to grab my move tool. I'm going to drag him up, bring him up here, and drop him in place. Profile mismatch. Don't worry about it. Let's hit OK. And let's put him right here. Cool. Could make him a little bit bigger, maybe Command or Control T. Let's just make him just a touch bigger. And what I want to focus on here with my layer mask is, well, first of all, we got a lot of kind of dusty haloing around the top of the fur. But really what I want to focus on is here on these straight edges. You can see there is just ever so slightly a bit of fringing. Now, there are all kinds of different fringe removal techniques here under layer. You got matting, defringing, but we're working in a mask here. So how are we going to attack this? Well, you may initially think the brush tool, and yes, you're correct, the brush tool, but the problem with the brush tool is here, if I'm painting with black and gently painting along the edge, well, I can very easily just move into or slip, not get a straight line, whatever. While I'm down here, I'm just going to paint away that little bit of annoying stuff because it's annoying. In order to make this easy, the cheat code is go to mode and choose the soft light blend mode. Make your brush a little bit bigger here. Let me use the technique that I just told you about and just paint up to the edges. And what this soft light blend mode is doing is it is just making the whites a little bit whiter, pushing the whites a little bit further, or if you paint with black, it's going to push black a little bit further, and that is going to do things like allow you to paint right up to an edge and remove a bit of that haloing where maybe it's a little gray, right? You're saying, no, make that gray white, right? Or make that gray black. In this case, we're painting with black, so it's like, hide that stuff. Make all that little haloing go away. And we can do the same here. If we make our brush a little bit bigger, make it a bit softer, we can gently tap around some of this haloing and just, tone it down a little bit. We're going to get to in just a moment here how to clean up some of this stuff and make it a little bit darker. But we can at least tone some of it down, make it look like it's not quite as, there's not a fog machine running out of the backside of his jacket, something like that, particularly in these darker areas, right, where that sort of dustiness really shows up. So that little feature, that little tip there, using soft light blend mode on the brush tool itself, really, really useful for cleaning up and getting nice, sharp, clean edges in a more complex photo like this. And this brings us to tip number 6. Now, I just went and kind of cleaned this image up a little bit, added a couple adjustment layers to help blend him in a little. And I also corrected the mask. There was like a little annoying line on the right side there. We still have, though, this kind of haloing edge and a little bit of this blueness on the edge. So how do we work with edges that are complex where we want to change the lighting just on the edges? Well, there's a number of different things we can do. The first thing would be, here we have this curves adjustment layer just kind of darkening him, helping him just match with the scene a little bit more. I want to sort of fuse that curves adjustment layer to the dog without losing the curves adjustment layer. So the way to do that is select both the layers, go layer, layer, if I can get my mouse to go there, smart object, convert to smart object, and then we can just call him dog. And if we ever want to adjust the curves adjustment layer, double click on dog thumbnail. Here it is. It's as if it's in its own little Photoshop document. Now, there are a couple things that I would try to do first and foremost. The first thing would be duplicate the dog layer, Command or Control J, and then drag dog copy to the bottom. In fact, we could call this dog darken or something like that. And set this layer to the blend mode multiply. You could go multiply, you could go darken, anything like that. And then throw a layer mask onto our dog layer. So now that it's a smart object, we can throw another layer mask on it. And then go around with your brush tool and just begin painting away the edges of our top dog a little bit. Maybe I'll make my brush even a little bit bigger here and just see what that does in terms of getting rid of some of that kind of haloing effect. And that's okay, I guess. I mean, it seems like it more or less gets rid of a lot of the detail we had up there. And if we look, there's our dog in the back. One thing you could do, you could try using the darken blend mode as well. That probably wouldn't work nearly as well here for us, but maybe it would. Let me see. I don't like it as much. You could also try a whole multiplicity of blend modes. If you want it to be lighter, by the way, your edges, you would use the screen blend mode down here. You could also do something like hard light. That tends to work good for things like this. But here I think we'll stick with multiply for a moment. But what I want to try here, I'm going to just select this layer mask and drag it to the garbage. We actually don't want that layer mask. What I want to try instead first is just changing the color and brightness of the edge using a selection. That's what this whole tutorial is about, right? Selections. So here's what I would do. I would Command or Control click on the dog. Now, if you didn't have the dog in a smart object, you would Command or Control click the layer mask to create a selection of that object. Then I'm going to go select. I keep confusing layer and select today. Select, modify, contract, and we want to contract this quite heavily, maybe like 85 pixels, something like that. And we're going to hit OK. It's going to pull us way back. And then we're going to go select, modify, and we're going to choose feather. Now, we want to feather it quite a bit as well, but I tend to like to feather it about half, maybe a little more than half of what we pulled back. So I'll go like 45 pixels on the feather. Remember, we pulled back 85 pixels, 45, a little more than half of 85. Cool. Now what we have is this kind of selection of the dog in the middle. And this would be great, except it's selecting every part of the dog except what we actually want. So we're going to go select inverse to flip our selection. And this is what we want here. So let's try doing this first with let's go with, I don't know, curves. Let's start with curves. And we're going to say, look, let's take some of the blue out of the edges. So I'm going to go to the blue channel. I'm going to pull down on the top point and just make that a little more yellow. And then maybe we want to push a little bit of red into there. So let's say make it a little more red, something like that maybe. And that actually might be about what we want. Now, maybe you're seeing what the problem is here. If I shut the curves layer off and turn it back on, we're actually changing the color of the entire background as well, which, while it might work with an abstract composite where who cares, nobody really knows what it's supposed to look like. A dog shouldn't be wearing a hoodie walking down an old street. But that's not what we want. We want more control over this. So here's all we need to do. We're going to control click on our dog again to make a selection of him. And we're going to inverse this selection. So we're going to go select inverse. And now what we're doing is selecting all the area around the dog, of course. And we would fill this with black. Now, something else, by the way, that you could do if I hit Command or Control D to deselect, you could use a clipping mask. Hold down your Alt or Option key, hover between the two layers, and just say, clip that curves adjustment layer just to the dog. Right? And now you're going to see it's just giving us that yellow edge around the very edge of the dog. That's the way I would normally do it. The reason I want to do it this other way, which, by the way, this isn't the best way to do it, but it's going to visualize what's going on here. If we select that layer mask, fill it with black, Command or Control D to deselect. If I Alt or Option click on the mask, you can see when we create that clipping mask and clip that curves layer just to the dog, this is all you're going to be applying the effect to, this blurred edge of the dog with all that detail on the very outer edge of the hoodie. I do want to just clip that to the dog, and we can do a quick before and after, and you see it changes the color of the edges. Is it perfect? No. Would I spend a lot more time working on this? Absolutely. But here we could throw like dog darken back on here, and then we could begin painting away some of our dog, and maybe you would even reduce the opacity of this brush tool, right? Just be nice and gentle. Just kind of gently go in there and get rid of bits that it looks like it would be good to get rid of. What looks like it would be good to just have some darker details there on the edges kind of showing through without it looking like we're completely destroying the integrity of the fluffiness of the hoodie. So something like that, right? There's before, there's after, right? It just makes kind of a big difference. So it's a nice little thing to do, but being able to apply light, brightness, color, darkness, just to the edges of a selection. That's the way I do it. And it's a really, really nice and very useful technique for all sorts of different things, particularly compositing, but all kinds of different things you can use that for. So this brings us to tip number 7, and that is ultra complex selections like this tree that you can do shockingly easily. Now, a little bit of a caveat, because it does kind of depend on the type of image you have, but something like this where you have a really complex object contrasted against largely a color or multiple colors that are different than the thing you're trying to cut out. Like right here, we got a big blue sky behind a green-yellow tree. This is going to be a nice example for this type of technique, but it's a great technique to know about and have in your back pocket. It's pretty easy. You come over to your channels panel and then look through your channels, and you're just looking for whatever has the most contrast here. And we can see that here, the tree is almost entirely black and the sky behind it almost entirely white. Now it's light gray. We're going to fix that though. Very important point here. You want to drag your channel down and drop it on the new channel icon to create a new channel. If you start working right on the channel, you do bad things to your image, you mess up the color, and it's kind of like throw it out and start over again. We're going to go here to our blue copy channel. We could rename it whatever we want. I'm not going to rename it. And then we can use adjustment layers. So let's go, not adjustment layers, adjustments. So let's go image adjustment levels. And we're just going to play with levels here. And we're going to say, look, well, ultimately what I want is I want the sky to be totally white and everything on the tree that I want to keep totally black, or some, like the edges maybe could be some variation of gray, because, you know, dark gray is going to be less of a selection, light gray more of a selection. So let's bring up that levels dialog again. And I'm working on that blue copy channel. And let's first of all bump the sky to be white. Cool. And then I'm going to begin with the gray point in the middle and just say, look, darken the tree, because I could crank the black point way over, and yeah, the tree is totally black. But you're going to see that this makes a very jagged edged selection. You want to bear in mind in the back of your head, a lot of a tree is kind of see-through, right? The little wispy leaves blowing around in the wind. So we want to make the tree dark, but not so dark that it's we're getting jagged edges. So I'm just going to drag that midpoint instead of just jumping right on the black slider, and I'll hit OK. Now we've got some stuff we can get rid of down here. I am going to just use my rectangular marquee tool, my polygonal lasso tool, and I'm going to come through here and just say, like, yeah, I'll save that part of the tree. Maybe I'll save the little swing, and then I'm just going to come through here. And let's select all of this. I'm going to zoom out just a second, and we're going to just drag a rough selection around all this, and we're going to fill this with white. So I'm just going to fill that with white, Command or Control D to deselect. And now we've made the job for Photoshop and levels even easier. We still have this gray around the tree down here and some gray in between the branches and leaves. Let's go image adjustments, levels again. And let's just say, hey, crank up the white a little bit more, bring the white over. I'm really watching down here next to the swing. We just want to get rid of that, all that gray, just like that, and then maybe open it up, bring some of the black back for the tree, and hit OK. So now when you're looking at this, you can think about this like a layer mask, right? The white is the stuff that's going to be selected. The black's the stuff that's not going to be selected. Well, in this case, I actually want the tree to be selected. So I can just hit Command or Control I, right? It's the same as going image adjustments invert right there. And it's going to flip, right? The black becomes white and the white becomes black. And now if I turn on my RGB composite channel, you can see the tree is the only thing that's selected. Now down here, it's rough and everything. We don't care about that. We're more concerned about the very complex selection of the leaves. If I shut off my blue channel, it gets rid of that red weird overlay, but I can Command or Control click this channel, and it's now going to load that as a selection. We could do something like, let's drag this down to the new layer icon and apply a layer mask. And now we've cut the tree out onto its own layer, just like that. Now, you could throw a new sky behind it. You could throw a solid color behind it, whatever you want. The point is, very, very quickly, you can go in and make these really complex selections. I mean, we still have the swing with the lines of the swing sitting right there to be used. So using channels to make complex selections, particularly in applications like this, can be very, very useful. It can be a little secret weapon there in your toolbox, so to speak. So this brings me to tip number 8. This is kind of a quick one. I just dragged in this image of these clouds, dropped it behind my tree, and you can see, yeah, there's a little bit, it's not perfect, right? There's some cleaning up to do as soon as we add a sort of a real image behind this and see how it works. Well, a lot of edges here to clean up if we were to use smudge or a brush with soft light. So one of the things we can do is if we Alt or Option click on the mask, you can see it's just black and white. So we can't apply a levels or curves adjustment layer directly to the mask and just say, look, I need you to kind of bring the black in a little bit more, right? Get rid of some of that white junk that's floating around. And if I hit OK and Alt or Option click to get out of the mask, we've made all of that much less bright. In fact, you probably wouldn't even want to hit Alt or Option to go into the mask. I just did that to show you what's going on. Normally, I would just select the mask here in the Layers panel, go Image, Adjustments, Levels, and then again, bring the blacks up, bring the blacks over, something like that until it starts to look good. And then, of course, you could use those techniques we talked about before in terms of bringing some of the edges back, making them brighter, darker, whatever. All of that stuff can be applied to a really complex selection like this as well. So using levels to go in and wholesale adjust the edges of a mask, particularly when it's a really complex selection like this, can be a very, very useful little trick. All right, so this brings me to tip number 9, where we are going to put together some of the other tips that I've already talked about, but I want to show you one more sort of approach to select and mask that can make it much less frustrating for you. I'll put it to you that way. So we've got this image of this woman here holding the grapefruit. We want to select her, but we have two very different types of edges. One is a detail-oriented edge in terms of there's a little bit of texture there on the edges of her sweater, but we've got a whole different ball game when we're talking about the texture coming in and out of focus here with her hair. So this is going to be a very tricky, very difficult selection. In fact, I would go so far as to say right now, getting this image to work on anything but another light colored background probably isn't going to happen. So, but we're going to try to move her to another light colored background and see how our selection techniques that we've covered so far work. But what I want to specifically talk about is how to attack something like this. And that is you want to split and use multiple passes of select and mask. Here's how that works. We would go select subject. It's going to bam, grab a selection of her. Cool. Then we go Command Option R. That'd be Control Alt R, of course, on the PC. Then all I'm going to pay attention to is the edge of her sweater. And you can see it needs some help. So we're going to go edge detection first. Let's turn on smart radius and then go like 3, 4, 5 maybe for the smart radius. And that does a bit. Like that's pretty helpful. We'll smooth it out a little bit. We don't want to smooth it too much though, because there's that knitted sweater quality where it has a nice little bit of crunchiness on the edge. Then we're going to go ahead and feather it just a touch. Maybe feathered a little more, maybe feathered a little more. And this is the kind of stuff you don't want to do to hair. Like you don't want to feather and then pull hair back in like that. It's going to give you such a weird, bizarre straight cut on it. It's not going to look good. Cool, that's good on that edge. Over here on this side of the sweater, also pretty good. Up here on the side of her hand, we're looking good. Great. Now here's one thing. When you're doing multiple passes of select and mask, you want to make sure that you're outputting to just straight standard layer mask. Otherwise, Photoshop's going to keep creating new copies of the layer with a new layer mask every time you come in and make adjustments. So just going layer mask ensures that we're now going to work on multiple layer masks. By the way, we use this edge detection tool. If I turn on show edge, we're even going to see the little tiny 4-pixel edge that Photoshop is automatically generating around our subject. So kind of cool, just something to note there. We're going to hit OK here, and we have created the selection for her sweater. Let's go ahead and throw a background behind her. We're just going to go with a solid color adjustment layer here, or a solid color fill layer, I should say. And we are going to use the color DFD0B3. So just a very light peachy orange color. I'm going to drop that behind her. That's just Control and the left square bracket key, Command and the left square bracket on the Mac. Don't worry about that connection loss thing. That's my Bluetooth Wacom tablet. All right, now that we've done this, we have some work to do on her hair. It still does not look all that good. Over here, it looks really bad. So how can we help this? Well, we can help it, and we've just taken care of her sweater. So let's select this mask, and you can jump into select a mask any way you want, the hotkey, whatever. You can open up the properties panel. There's a big select and mask button there. Let's just do that because, well, we can. I'm going to turn my tablet back on here. Let's use the Refine Edge brush tool. And this is the kind of image where if you have a brush that's too big, I mean, it just, here, we'll go with a big brush here, and we're going to say, look, just examine the whole image, Photoshop, and you can see it's just blitzing her hair. It's getting rid of so much of the volume in her hair. It's really bad. So let's just make this much, much smaller. We're going to make it as small as we can kind of get away with for this edge, and let's just go ahead and start painting over the edge, and let's look to see how it looks. See, it still looks really bad, which means the brush is just too big. So let's go back, make it smaller. Let's go over the edge like this, and let's take a bit more of the edge as well, just to give Photoshop kind of more to work with. It's a very difficult image to do this kind of edge detection on because it's coming into focus, it's falling out of focus, the background is multicolored. It is the worst of the worst when it comes to the edges. Now, this doesn't look all that great, but we have to remember we're viewing this over a black background. And remember I had said this type of image is probably never going to look good over a dark background. But if we take it and just look at it on layers, that's going to show it to us over our current light background. Now we're kind of cooking. There's a little bit of haloing down here and up here, but I think we can maybe make this work. Let's go ahead over here and just say, can we clean this edge of the hair up a little bit? Can we do something with it? And it does something with it. It's not necessarily what I love, but Now we can come down and hit OK. Notice we're still outputting to the same layer mask, hit OK. And we have created a single layer mask, but used two different passes of select and mask. Now, of course, at this point, this is where, and let me show you how the smudge tool can be great for this, as well as your brush tool set to what? Soft light, of course. We'll just size that down a little bit. I'm going to paint with black because we want to get rid of a little bit of that haloing. I want to keep the texture of the hair that is popping out. I'm just looking for areas that look particularly bright or dark and just looking to tone them down a little bit, right? Like that. And then over here maybe, but you can see like what in the world is going on there. That might be a candidate of give me the brush tool not set to overlay, just normal blend mode, and then size this way down. And I'm going to make sure it's set back to 100. I'm just going to paint with black, and just for the sake of the tutorial, just paint that away. That's not necessarily how I would do it if I'm working on a commercial job, but this is just a video for you and I. And now that we've done that, well, there's a little bit of lightness up here in the hair. Normally I would grab that brush again, but I just want to show you the smudge tool, and the smudge tool works great. Make it, pretty decent sized where you have the mask selected, and then just come in here and begin doing this kind of thing. We're just little gentle taps, and you can see it's going to get rid of haloing, but it's going to almost add more of that hair texture to the edges, which is great because normally you begin to lose that hair texture as you begin to kind of clean those edges up, which of course we don't want to do. I mean, she's got all this great curly hair. We don't want to lose all of that by just coming in here with a broad brush and just, completely covering all that stuff up. So by combining those things, but mainly by going in and splitting and doing a double pass of select and mask, you have a really great plan of attack when you're going after an image that's very, very difficult to select, like this one here. And the edges can still use a little bit of work, but we need to get on to the last tip. And the last tip is, again, with complex edges, but using these somewhat enigmatic decontaminate edges. I'm opening up this little powder explosion image here. And again, we can select this however we want. Let's just go select subject and then Command Option R, Control Alt R to jump into select and mask. I'm going to use my refine edge brush tool. Let's make it a little bit bigger. It's actually a little bit too big, and just begin painting over these edges. We don't really care how perfect or not perfect this comes out. I'm just looking for all these edges, like, just try to make this look okay, Photoshop. Something like so. Great, 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 cool. And it does this, which ain't great. Let's go ahead and try to find that edge again. And then we hit OK, and you can see you've got this really complex selection, and you could pop this up onto a new layer. You could mask it. You could do all sorts of things with this. We're just going to go ahead, since we outputted a selection instead of a mask, and just choose, give me the layer mask. Cool, so we've got that layer mask. Now, I just went and opened up another copy of that dark street. So let's drag this over onto the dark street and see what it looks like. All right, so we drag it over, and I mean, it's definitely gotten rid of the black background, but there's a lot of weird dark haloing. It doesn't quite look right, and a lot of it is the selection that Refine Edge just kind of did a bit of damage. So let's go back to select and mask and take another look at this here. Now, we are looking at this on layers, so we're going to see it with our background showing. And I could sit here and spend a bunch of time working on, refine the edge, refine it even more, keep refining it, don't stop refining it. But there is all the way at the bottom this option to decontaminate colors. Now, this is something that will either do really nice things or really not nice things. So just know that it's here and know that it's something you can play with. I'm going to hit Decontaminate Colors, and you can see I kind of like what it's done. I mean, there's a little bit of like over here, maybe not so much, a little bit too much in there. But it's really given us, instead of like this weird black dust, it's given us very blue dust coming off of our powdery burst. And you also have this little slider. So you could say, I only want 40%. There's too much. So something like that, maybe 38% is great. Let's just say, let's do new layer with layer mask. Sure. We're going to hit OK. And you're going to see what this is going to do and why Photoshop really wants us to create a new layer with layer mask. If I hold down Shift and just disable the layer mask, you can see what Decontaminate Color does to the edges. It goes in and completely destroys the original image. So we still have an original copy without Decontaminate Color or decontaminate the edges, but you can see that what it's done. But what it's doing is it's allowing that blue color to show through in those semi-opaque pixels, so that hopefully you end up with an image that has much more realistic edges when it's something really, really complex like this. And yeah, that is going to just about do it for this one. I hope you found this video to be both fun and informative. Thanks for sticking around and watching all the way to this point. And see, making complex selections, getting good edges on your selections. It's not that difficult in Photoshop. It just takes a little bit of understanding and then a little bit of work on your end. And the more you practice it, of course, the better you're going to get at it. So that is going to be it for this one. My name is Nathaniel Dodson. I'll see you in the next video. Get it? Got it? Good.